Good evening and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We will be getting going in a couple of minutes time, but we're just waiting for a few more people to join us. In the meantime, feel free to pop a message in the chat about where in the region you're joining us from. And just a bit of housekeeping, we'll be keeping folks on mute during the meeting because if we were all speaking at once, it could end up being a bit of a cacophony and we don't want any of those annoying feedback noises. So yeah, drop a message in the chat and we'll get going very shortly. Hello again, everyone. Just to let you know, we'll be getting going in a few moments' time. We're just waiting for a few final attendees to join us, and then I can kick the evening off. Just so people know who I am, I'm Matthew Topham. I'm campaigner at Better Buses for South Yorkshire, and I'll be kind of chairing and filling in little bits throughout the evening. My colleague is just putting up two of the candidates to share the spotlight with me for the moment. So we've got Simon Biltcliffe joining and Bex also, but I'll be introducing all the candidates in full in just a moment's time. Right, at 2 minutes past, I think that might be the moment to fully kick off. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this evening. This is a really important local public meeting to discuss why South Yorkshire residents need our new mayor to bring the region's buses into public control as soon as possible. Today, we're going to hear from local residents who rely on South Yorkshire's buses and who would see a massive benefit if our buses were under public control rather than under the control of the private companies that are in charge at the moment. Those bus passengers are going to share their personal experiences of services in the region and explore the ways the privatised and deregulated system is failing them and their communities. So this evening, we're going to be joined by Tammy Wong, who's going to speak on her experience as a young parent and the impact that the kind of concern for the climate, but the inability to completely ditch the car causes her and her family. We were going to hear from Abab Chowdhury, but unfortunately, transport's conspired against us and he's not actually able to get back from his commute today. But in his place, his partner Amy is going to be speaking about his experience commuting into Doncaster. We're going to be joined by Kathy McCartan, a business owner and student locally who relies on the bus because of visual impairment. And we're going to also hear from George Arthur, a retired teacher in Barnsley, and finally, Thomas Atkin, a young carer and bus user. As you can see, I'm very grateful to you all for coming along to hear their stories, but I'm especially pleased to welcome the four folks who are sharing the spotlight with me right now. We've got Simon Biltcliffe from the Yorkshire Party. If you give away, Simon, thank you. We've got Bex from the Green Party. We've got Joe from the Liberal Democrats, and we've got Oliver joining us from the Labour Party. Thank you so much for coming along, folks, to hear these important stories and then let us know what you're going to be doing, if elected, to fix South Yorkshire's bus crisis. Final bit of housekeeping from me before we get started properly. I'm going to outline the meeting's agenda. So first of all, we're going to have our very special guest, Nancy Fielder, editor at the Sheffield Star, introduce the issues facing South Yorkshire's buses. I'll then introduce the powers that the next mayor has to fix our local bus network. We'll then hear from 6 local bus users who would see that benefit day to day and their experiences of the current failing system. And we'll then put their asks, their questions, their needs back to the candidates, who'll each have 3 minutes to respond to those concerns. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Nancy to come in and explore the background to South Yorkshire's bus crisis. Over to you, Nancy.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm delighted to be here. We are slightly obsessed with buses at the Star, and I can tell you exactly why. It's because our readers are slightly obsessed with buses. And I think in Sheffield, everybody has been for longer than I've been alive. So I just saw a message from Martin in Healy pop up and say, we've got the worst bus service in the world. So when I was growing up in Healy, I would stand on Chesterfield Road with my mum, and her parents lived in Blackpool. So her dad would come down, and she was a single mum with 2 kids. He would put his hand in his pocket when the bus came and said, "Don't worry, love, I'll treat you." And she'd be like, "Thanks, Dad, but it costs us 9p to get the entire family into town. So you're all right, put your £5 note away." It was completely different from anywhere else. And it was actually the best bus service in the world. And in my lifetime, it's gone from being one of the best to something that's just been called the worst. And I'm not sure we can argue with that. My son went to London. He's only 16. And first thing he messaged me, "I've made it, Mum. Can you believe all the public transport's free for his age?" And all these things, they laugh at the stories of back in the day when it was cheap, but actually there are people now who have got decent services and who have got it at affordable price, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be us. So the Star, as I've said, I've got a few of our cuttings. I mean, we could write endless novels on this. We've written so much. I am just going to read you one short little clip. It's from 1985. You probably can't see it very well. It's called End of the Road. And this was when the decision had already been taken but hadn't been enforced. And the predictions are, it's got graphics, the number of bus passengers in South Yorkshire could drop from 345 million to 228 million. The prices were going to go up from 10p in 85. They were predicting it was going to 40p in 86. Pensioners were going to stop being free. Kids were going to go from 2p to 20p, and the services were going to be cut by 10%. And the introduction is, on April 1st next year, South Yorkshire's bus fares will go up something like 300% overnight. It will be the biggest overnight fares rise in the history of public transport, not only in South Yorkshire, but in the whole of Britain. At the same time, thousands of passengers, especially those who live in the more rural areas of the country, may well find that their regular bus services have been axed. Many of those who live in the major urban areas in Sheffield are likely to wait longer for buses. Pensioners whose free passes have helped keep the buses full during the off-peak periods may find themselves paying half fare, as may the school children who can now travel around the county for as little as 2p. Next April 1st, South Yorkshire's popular but controversial cheap buses reach the end of the road. And although April Fool's Day has been chosen as the day cheap fares get the chop, it will be no joke for the millions of passengers who use Britain's least expensive and most comprehensive bus service every year. Cheap fares have been under sentence of death before, of course, but on this occasion there will be no last-minute reprieve. Now, I would never say the Star has got a globe to be able to predict the future, but they got it right, didn't they? Everything that they predicted there and much worse has happened to our bus services. It wasn't Sheffield's fault that it moved out of public control, but it did. And what we're left with? We're left with roads that are absolutely gridlocked. We're left with buses that I get occasionally as a point of principle, and it's just too expensive for a family of 5. There is absolutely no point in me and my husband and 3 kids getting on a bus because it costs us more than it would to do anything else at all. They're unreliable. The kids have to use them, and they're often late getting to school or getting from school. And as soon as they hit 17, they want to be able to drive. We're creating a world for them where they just want to be able to get off the buses, and it's just really, really sad. This is the first real chance that we've had to do something about it, and I think that is why it's so important. I think there's been a lot of disappointment that more hasn't been done when the power to do something about public transport moved into our hands, and that's why there is so much pressure on at this election, because I think this is probably the biggest issue. This is not about people who have got well-paid jobs and commute on trains. This is about our elderly who have no other option. This is about our kids who have no other option, and this is actually about a climate crisis. We can't use Supertram, most of us, because it doesn't cover the entire city. That'd be great if the candidates could solve that as well. But actually, buses are what we need, and this is the opportunity. And I think if it's not seized, we're going to be seeing people in 40 years' time, we're going to be reading more cuttings like that, and it would just be tragic. That is my bit. I'm on time, Matthew.
Fantastic. Long may it continue. Thank you so much, Nancy. That is the background to the situation we're facing. We used to be world leading in the buses we have in South Yorkshire, and they delivered for local communities. But we have seen serious issues since then. So thank you, Nancy. And I'm just going to follow that up with a quick update about the South Yorkshire Bus Network, again, in general, moving on to this election in particular. And let's see if I can keep to time as well as Nancy did. So the winner of this election, of this mayoral election, will face 2 big emergencies. They're going to face the cost of living crisis that is starting to hit all of us, and they're going to face the climate crisis. And this really is a single policy that could start to address both issues, bringing buses into public control. And why is that? So nearly 40% of South Yorkshire's carbon emissions currently come from transport, and most of that is from cars. While we know it's the cost of fuel and other energy sources that are really a big part of what's driving the crisis on people's budgets. So that's why the region's buses, which were once world leading, both affordable and convenient, are so important. And many of us would leave the car at home still if they continue to be like that. But instead, we've seen year after year of decline since buses were deregulated in the 1980s, as we were just hearing from Nancy. They have seen a 60% drop across Yorkshire in the number of people using the bus. And it's easy to see why. With private companies put in charge and in a Wild West free market where they can do what they like, they have seen serious corners cut on the reliability. So up to a quarter of services in Doncaster last winter failed to turn up on time. Fares, well, they nearly quadrupled in the first couple of days of privatisation, but continuing since then, they've doubled in real terms. And all the while, the network is shrinking, meaning you can get less and less far on a ticket. And this has serious implications. Last year, a report from a former UN official called out the significant human rights impacts of deregulating the UK bus network, of handing it over with little public oversight to private companies. And they called out South Yorkshire's buses in particular as one of the worst areas affected by this. But they also highlighted how we could start to fix it by bringing our buses into public control. What is public control? Well, it also gets called franchising. It's where local services are under the control of the mayor, like they are in London. So fares, routes, standards are all set in the public interest, not in the interest of different companies trying to compete with each other, trying to get the most out of the local population. And look what powers it gives us. So London, Manchester have these plans. London already has it for a hopper fare, where a single journey that's taking you less than an hour, you can use any bus you like, and it gets capped at a certain cost, £1.55 in London, £2 over in Manchester. That would be transformative for our region. And the impacts are going to be fantastic, because London and Jersey, which have public control right now, have seen massive growth in bus usage, and it's shifting people out of cars. And that power that is currently illegal with the private companies in charge to get simple tickets that work across all the operators is put down to government as the reason why franchising or public control is the only way we are going to deliver a significant increase in bus use. They compared it to the others and they said that's the best way to do it. So at hustings last week with the 4 candidates who are joining us today, they all said that they in theory backed franchising, but we know that we can't just kind of rest on our laurels and accept that at face value, I'm afraid, folks. We know that we need more, because this is so urgent for the climate and for people's pockets. And we also are once bitten, twice shy. The current mayor was elected on a pledge to use the power of franchising, and we only started to see a formal legal step towards that happen last month, in the last couple of months of his term in office. We need you to crack on and deliver that. So that's why, as a campaign, we've been asking the candidates to make a Better Buses pledge. That means that they say, look, we've got my first 2 years in office, that's the time I'm going to use to crack on and make a final decision on whether to bring buses into public control. And I'm going to back that up with some serious action as well. I'm going to make it an accountable process by having a single civil servant in charge to make sure it's happening on time and on budget. I'm going to make it prompt by making sure that in the first 2 months in office, I'm taking the first step in that process. And I'm also going to make it transparent by releasing to the public a calendar where they can check off my progress as how I'm moving along to make better buses in public control happen. Because at the end of the day, that's what we need. We need those buses to work for people and for planet, not just for profit. So there's my pitch. Our response to the cost of living crisis in South Yorkshire needs to be built on action for better buses. So I'm sure you've all heard enough from me now. We're going to move on to our next section, which is to hear from folks who have that day-to-day experience of what it means to have a really poor bus system. And I'm going to come first to Tammy, if that's okay, to talk about her experience and the concerns that it raises for her. Over to you, Tammy.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm a parent to 2 children, and I worked out that it costs us £12 return for my husband, myself, and my 2 kids to go 3 miles down the road to Sheffield City Centre. And there used to be a £5 ticket that we could get, and now it's been withdrawn. That would have been a really big help, but it just puts us off from going on public transport. And you know, as the volunteer at Sheffield Green Parents, I would love to see more people out of private cars and into public transport like trams and buses. So that's why I backed the pledge for better buses, because I would love to see a more efficient, a more economical and sustainable way for people in Sheffield to travel. Because having people in cars, and with our current living costs and the situation with the fuel crisis, I think buses is a really easy way for everyone to make a difference sustainably. Not everyone can afford to buy solar panels for their houses. Not everyone can buy an electric car, or be able to do things that we need a large capital outlay. So having cheap bus fares to get from A to B around Sheffield, around South Yorkshire, would be the most accessible and easiest way for people like myself, or a full-time mum, to do something affordable and within our reach. So thank you. That's why I pledge for better buses to the South Yorkshire Mayoral. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tammy. And thank you for sharing that urgent need. You know, if we're going to make it easy for people to get around without using the car and to make that green journey, we need better buses, and we need the candidates to make this a priority. So thank you very much, Tammy. We were going to be joined by Abab today, who commutes into Doncaster for work, but as fate would have it, his commute has been disrupted and he's stuck halfway home at the side of the road. So instead, we are joined very gratefully by Amy, his partner, to explain a bit about his experience and the need for better public transport for commuters and for workers in our region. So thank you, Amy, and over to you.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, both myself and Abab work in Sheffield City Centre. We live in Sheffield City Centre, but he works in Doncaster and works for Doncaster Council. And his role requires him to do a lot of community work. So when he's in Doncaster, going from place to place, and the council actually have a pool of electric cars that they can use when in the city centre. So they're encouraging their employees to use public transport, then use these pool cars rather than private cars. So Abab went and looked to see if it was viable for him to be using public transport to get into Doncaster. And obviously there is that services that are not as reliable and they're not cheap enough. So at the time, it's more convenient for him to take his car and then get reimbursed for his mileage when travelling into Doncaster. However, like this was not the case. There was an instance where his car was no longer available, having car troubles, and so therefore he had to use public transport to get in. So ideally, he ended up using the train to begin with, but by the time he got into Doncaster, he needed to use a bus service. And comparing the Sheffield bus service and the Doncaster bus service as two completely different things with different fares and different services. And so on top of the price of a train ticket and a bus ticket, it becomes more and more expensive, and it increases the amount of time that he needed to take for his commute. This was even worsened by the fact that we had the recent storms and the trains were no longer available and the tracks were flooded, and therefore he needed to use a replacement bus service, which then is another private service that's outsourced by the trains, and there was a lot of people trying to use that route. So that's evidence that it's not just within Sheffield, people are making the commute from Sheffield to Doncaster and vice versa. But even still, he then got this replacement bus that dropped him off at Doncaster station for the price of a train fare, and then had to take a bus from Doncaster station back to his workplace. All in all, a 2-hour round trip, which his boss was not very happy about when he was coming into work at 11 o'clock. So he's actually been reprimanded for that, regardless if it's out of his control, but it's the amount of time, the amount of money that it takes for something which is a pretty common occurrence for people travelling between Sheffield, Doncaster and within the South Yorkshire region. So regardless if you make the Sheffield buses better, the South Yorkshire buses need to be better, because we're talking about this wider community in this wider area, and it's consistently expensive and unreliable. So hence why bringing buses under public control is a top priority. So we're asking candidates to make the Better Buses pledge.
Thank you so much, Amy. And it is really important to keep those things in mind, not only that this is not just an issue for Sheffield, it's about getting people around our entire region and for folks in Doncaster, Barnsley, Rotherham and across the entire area. But also, we've got to make it an integrated system. You know, if you're getting off the train and the bus isn't there, or you've got to buy a new whole expensive ticket and it's from a different company, that just doesn't work. When you're in London, you can move smoothly about. The whole system gets a cap ticket. That's the system that we need for South Yorkshire as well, if we're going to make it an easy job for commuters in our region. So thank you very much, Amy, and pass our thanks on to Abab as well. Well, I'm going to bring in Kathy now, if that's okay, to speak to her experience. Kathy, over to you.
Yeah, I'm studying at the moment, and I have to get a train to my university in Huddersfield, and the bus that I get in the last 2 months has only been on time once in the last 2 months. It's consistently late, 10-12 minutes. Don't know whether it's a timetabling issue. I also catch the same bus to get home from work, but there isn't a bus at the busy time of like 5 o'clock, 5:30. There's 16:45, then a 2-hour gap, and then 18:45. So it's not there for the busy times. Similarly, the number 20 has less buses before 9 o'clock than after 9 o'clock. So it's making it an unprofitable service because it's not got enough services at the right time. I only live 2 miles from the city centre, and I'm having to, I'm getting my house ready to move so that I can get better transport links. I've got no option to drive because of my sight. I'm not allowed to drive. And I'm having to relocate my home, my family home, to be able to get on a bus. And I only live 2 miles from a major city centre. I mean, it should be a service for the people, not for the shareholders. And the stress it causes on a daily basis for the South Yorkshire, it's not good for your health, it's not good for your well-being. In fact, the other day, the bus actually turned up on time, the one time, and the difference it made to my day, because it all ran perfectly smoothly, was quite phenomenal. And people are experiencing this on a daily basis, quite regularly. And even my parents are wishing to relocate, and as they're getting older, they're having to think about moving to somewhere with a good bus service. When we live in a major city, they shouldn't have to do that. They should have a good bus service anyway. So I'm really hoping that it does get taken back under public control. We get more regular buses more often, and just a better service in general that serves the people, not for profit. So I would hope that each candidate will make the Better Bus pledge.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And, you know, a really, really powerful example there. You shouldn't, in a major city in the UK, need to be moving house because there isn't a decent public service or public transport network near you. And the fact that similarly, on top of all the other stresses of moving house, picking somewhere to retire to, you've got to kind of be looking, well, where can we actually manage to get around cheaply and affordably on public transport? It's not a stress that people need. We need to be sorting that out. So thank you very much, Kathy, there. I'm going to bring George in now to speak to his experience. George, based over in Barnsley, over to you.
Hi, Matthew. I'm George Arthur. I live in Jump in Barnsley. Just before I say a bit about the buses, if Matthew will allow me, I wanted to pick up something that Nancy said about the trams, because when it was first introduced, we were told this was a South Yorkshire service. Barnsley and Doncaster have no sniffing of the tram. It'd be really nice to have a tram service that came into our towns as well. But talking about the buses, I have a car. I try to use buses as much as possible, and I've had a number of problems. There's one that I really want to focus on. I use the number 2 bus to get into Sheffield from where I live, just 10 minutes walk from where my house is. Last time I used the number 2 service to go into Sheffield, it broke down on the way in and had to be replaced in Ecclesfield. And the driver was very apologetic and told all the passengers that Stagecoach are really useless at maintaining vehicles. And he sort of indicated that money wasn't being spent where it should be on that. When I got the bus coming back from Sheffield, back to Jump, I went down to Flat Street in Sheffield to catch the bus at 3:30. This is a little while back when it was a really cold day, very bitterly cold, strong wind, and there were a couple in their 60s who were waiting at the bus stop with their parent who was in a wheelchair and had very limited ability to take care of herself. The bus didn't show up, so the woman phoned the inquiry line shown on the bus stop and was told that it would appear in 5 minutes. So everyone shivering bitterly thought, well, in 5 minutes, at least it'll be warm on the bus, hopefully. 10 minutes later, the bus still hadn't turned up, so she phoned again and was told it'll be along in 5 minutes. We waited another 10 minutes and it hadn't turned up. She phoned again and was told, well, actually it's been cancelled, it isn't going to turn up. The bus runs on an hourly service, so we all traipsed down into the interchange to catch the number 17 bus. And when we got down there, we found that had been cancelled as well. So we ended up walking back up Flat Street and catching the number 2 bus at nearly 4:45, well over an hour after we'd first arrived to get the bus back. All of us frozen. It was an awful day. The woman in the wheelchair was almost crying with the cold. It was like just barbarity that people had to suffer like that. The bus shelter is a really pathetic little one which doesn't sort of protect you from the elements at all. It just seems that the private bus companies don't care about us bus passengers at all. They really sort of just treat us as people that are going to put money in, and that's as far as their concerns go. And that's why I think that the next mayor needs to reassure the public that they'll make bringing buses into public control a top priority. I'm asking all the candidates, will you make the Better Buses pledge? And will you bring in franchising with speed as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, and another really powerful case there. And just a little fun fact, our buses in South Yorkshire are older than the average for the entire country. And why does that matter? Well, it matters for the story that George has just told us. They're more likely to break down and we're more likely to be left stranded on those cold nights or at night when it's dark and people can start to feel unsafe waiting at a bus stop. So that's why it matters. We need to have the buses under public control so we can make sure that we're investing in a fleet that is up to scratch. So thank you very much, George, there. I'm going to bring in Thomas now, please, if that's okay. Thank you very much. And over to you, Thomas.
Hi. So I live in Woodseats and my dad lives in Totley and I care for him. So I have to travel routinely on a weekly basis between Woodseats and Totley. It's a walk down the hill and one bus that runs every half an hour to get there, the 98 bus. I say it runs every half an hour. I mean, it's meant to run every half an hour. It doesn't, because one of those buses never turns up. Sometimes it is quicker for me as a disabled person to walk to Totley than it is for me to get the bus, because they are so unreliable. Now, at one point, I did used to live with my dad, and I did live up there when I was younger. And I went to Meadowhead School, and so I'd have to get the two buses to school every morning. And I'd have to leave at 6:45 in the morning to be able to get there on time. School didn't start till 8:30. I had to leave that early just to be sure that I'd get there on time, because the buses were that terrible. A few weeks ago, me and my dad went out. We were going to the new retail park up on Jordanthorpe, and we were going to get on that little M17 bus, that little handy community service that is now being cut from Saturday service completely. We were told that his wheelchair wasn't allowed on as it didn't fit regulations. despite this being the standardised wheelchair that the NHS provides to patients, that he's got on that bus numerous times with before. Now, both me and my dad have this little handy dandy disabled bus pass, and it's extremely handy because it's free and it has no time limits, unlike the pensioners pass. Just before the pandemic, I was stuck in town with a load of pensioners. We'd been to the Crucible Theatre, we'd seen Guys and Dolls, we'd loved it. And we were sat waiting on then High Street, about before they closed Vincent Street. And we were waiting for the 75, didn't turn up, waiting for the 76, turn up, went around the corner for the 24, didn't turn up. We were there 2 hours until a bus came just before midnight when their passes were no longer valid. So they were forced to pay because the bus company couldn't be bothered to send the bus to the stop. Our buses are terrible, and I'm under no illusion that franchising is not a magic fix-all thing. But it's becoming unbearable. Both me and my dad qualify for Motability cars. We decided not to take it, A, because of the climate, and B, because it's cheaper. But now we're both having to consider driving because it's becoming impossible to get around the city. That's why I'm asking all candidates to make the Better Buses pledge to bring in franchising and start improving our bus services.
Fantastic. Thank you, Thomas. Really appreciate that. And, you know, so much there. One thing to pick up on amongst the others, the impact of a poor public transport system on folks going to school. If you're coming in that bit extra early, imagine the impact that's having on people's ability to concentrate during class and to you know, seize the opportunities in our region. We really need that better public transport system as well. So thank you very much, Thomas. I'm going to see if we can also have a final little kind of testimony from Susan Wild as well, which may take us just a bit of a further moment as well as I try to bring her up. I'm not sure that I'm going to manage it, folks. Oh, see if that works. Hi, Susan. I've managed to spotlight you there. Might bring you in just to hear a final example of what the impact on our privatised and deregulated bus network is on local people. So over to you, Susan.
Yeah, I'm Sue Wild and I live at Norton. I'm a pensioner and I use the 20 bus. That's the only one really that I can catch, and it's an absolutely terrible bus route. I live, I'm a pensioner, I live on my own, I don't drive, I live on my pension, so the buses are my lifeline and I can't do without them. There's a lot of other people, pensioners, who use my bus. A lot of them use it. And if they're stood at bus stops, it's awful for them because sometimes there's no shelter, sometimes there's no seats, and a lot are stood there with sticks and everything. So the system is terrible. Fetching my granddaughter from school as well. If I go in a car, which I can't drive anyway, it only takes 10 minutes, but I have to catch 2 buses to it, which takes 50 minutes to get there. So I've been late fetching her from school many a time. And to take her to her own home, I've had to wait sometimes an hour for a bus in all weathers. And the times I've had to catch a taxi from there. And I've been isolated in town not long ago in the evening because my bus never turned up. And I thought, well, I'm not staying in town. I felt really vulnerable. So I had to get a taxi that cost me £11.60. And the timetable's absolutely useless, as you never know when the bus will turn up anyway. And if you've got to be somewhere for an appointment, you've got to leave at least an hour and a half to make sure that you've got to get to the place you want to get to on time, like a hospital appointment. And so 2 journeys, for most journeys, are a nightmare, like I've said. So I can remember when I was younger and buses were great. You could get a bus anywhere in Sheffield, no problem. Now it's terrible. And I just feel that the buses control my life and make me apprehensive to use them. And it's caused me so much stress for someone of my age. So that's why I and other pensioners think it's so important for the next mayor to make the Better Buses pledge and support us a hell of a lot more than we have had support. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sue. A really important example there of why we need to make this change. And if folks will forgive me, I'm going to abuse my position as chair before I bring in our candidates, just to pick up on something there, because when our buses fail us, we can't just, you know, adapt, because if you're stuck in the middle of town, you're stuck in the middle of town. If you've not got your car, how are you meant to get home? It's often a taxi. But it's not just those emergency situations. Sometimes the network is just so bad that you can't rely on it. So I know of 2 student nurses who are paying 40 quid a day to get into and back from work by taxi because they just cannot get the bus into work at the times that they are working. And on a student nurse's pay, when they've already done so much for our communities during the pandemic, that really is a shame. So I'll wrap our fantastic testimonies up from our speakers with that final little story. So thank you very much, everyone, for sharing your experience there. I'm now going to turn to our mayoral candidates one by one, just to highlight to you folks, because I don't want to let the meeting drag on too long. You'll each be getting 3 minutes, and I will then kind of move you on to the next candidate. I'll wave once 2 minutes have elapsed, so you know how much time you've got left. First, we're going to be joined by Oliver Coppard. So I hope you've perhaps enjoyed is not the right word, Oliver, but you've appreciated those experiences that we've heard this evening. And I will put to you the question we've been hearing from our speakers. If elected mayor, will you be implementing this Better Buses pledge, and will you make it here with us this evening? So over to you, Oliver, for your 3 minutes now. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you to all the people that have offered their testimony. It's sometimes not easy to share things like that on Zoom in front of a large audience, and all the people kind of making comments in the chat as well. The stories that you've told, sometimes as a candidate, it's possible to sort of think you hear from people in certain kind of, I don't know what you call them, pressure groups or groups who are influenced or affected by certain issues. And it's possible to think that the people that are speaking out are just a small group of people who don't necessarily represent the views of others. I think the difference here tonight is that the views of the people that we've heard tonight are just scratching the surface of a huge problem for our whole community. You know, so you guys are just, you know, the tip of the iceberg, quite frankly. The stories that you've told this evening are experiences that as somebody that lives and works in South Yorkshire, I've felt and experienced myself. So like Susan, you talked about the taxi and the cost of a taxi when the bus didn't turn up. I've absolutely been there. Amy, you mentioned that, you know, in terms of coming back from Doncaster and living in Sheffield and the difficulties there of your partner, Abbas. Like, I used to work in Barnsley and lived in Greystones. It's an absolute nightmare. Thomas, you talked about kind of getting to school. I lived up near Dore when I was a kid, and I had to get to Norton College at the time, actually. And again, you know, it was an absolute nightmare. So these things are not new. These are long-standing problems. I mean, even going back to Nancy's point about the buses as they used to be. And it's been a disgrace, the changes that have been made and the service that we now have. And I don't think anybody in their right mind can honestly defend the status quo as it currently is. So let me be absolutely clear. I am committed to the public control of our buses. I just want to put that out there right from the off. I think that's incredibly important. Tom's right, it's not a silver bullet, but it's absolutely the best thing we can do to make our bus service fit for the future and hopefully make a step change in the way that things operate, because we would be in control of those services rather than the private companies. In terms of the pledge itself, I'm really happy to commit to being accountable, being accountable, being prompt and being transparent. So that's absolutely no problem at all. The one I have a slight problem with is saying that we're going to be able to start that process, finish that assessment process within 2 years. And I only say that because I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. Being here in front of you, asking for your votes, your support, your endorsement, I don't want to do that and then not deliver on the other side. So I will do my utmost. I will work every day to make that happen. I'm happy to be accountable, prompt and transparent, and I will do it as quickly as we possibly can. And if that's within 2 years, brilliant, but I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So that's the only bit I have a slight challenge in.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Oliver, for coming in under time there. And thank you for committing to be accountable, prompt and transparent on this, because we really don't have time to waste, and we really can't just, as a public, wash our hands of this once the mayor is in office. So we're grateful to you for that. But looking forward to seeing that work to make it happen within 2 years of taking office as well. I'll be moving then straight on to our next candidate. So Bex from the Green Party. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'll ask you the same question I've just asked Oliver. Will you make the Better Buses pledge so that when you become mayor, public control is a top priority and that we can see that real progress within your first 2 years in office? Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. And to be quite honest, it's a very easy answer for me. It's an absolute yes. I will be backing this Better Buses pledge. I've looked at it in detail. I think it's a very, very well thought out plan. I mean, the absolute first thing that I will do once I'm chairing the first meeting is appointing a person that can hold me to account, you know, to oversee all of it. So that as a first point of call is something that will happen. And as far as starting the progress and getting it to a fruition, to an end within that first 2 years is an absolute commitment. It does need to be prompt. We can't wait around anymore for this. I was at the meeting and I witnessed what happened when the commitment was made to start the investigations into franchising. And there was talks about it taking 10 years. And I'm sorry, but we just haven't got 10 years. And I mean, as I'm obviously the Green Party, so, you know, the pollution that is in the air at the minute is absolutely utmost in my priority. But it's not just about that. And I think that, Matthew, when you talked about the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis, it just absolutely goes hand in hand. And buses, to resolve the issues that we've got with the buses is the best way to go about it. And I just want to say a really heartfelt understanding to Nancy, Tammy, Abab and Amy, Kathy and George. I absolutely experience and feel a lot of that. Kathy, I had a tear in my eye when you were talking, because I completely relate. I've literally moved house this week because I've been trying to relocate for a year and a half now, and I've moved into my last place that's hopefully more permanent so that I can be closer to town where I work. So I absolutely feel that.
Thanks, Bex. Thank you very much. Sorry to cut across you there, but I'll maybe leave that as a good place to wrap up, if that's okay. Thank you so much for your input there. And yes, I must say, I think we all feel those stories this evening. We've all had that experience of being stuck in town or having to really consider how we get around our region. So thank you very much there. We'll move now to bring Joe Otten in from the Lib Dems. And Joe, I'm going to put the same question to you that I've put to the other candidates. We've heard the desperate need today for improvements to our bus services. Will you make the Better Buses pledge to make that a reality? Oh, sorry, Joe, we're just having some technical issues. Can you unmute? Thank you.
There we go. Yes, I was trying to unmute. I was still, anyway. Yeah, absolutely. No, I'll sign up 100%. I agree. Absolutely, this is what we need to do. I was struck by listening to all the people who've spoken in this, that the unifying theme, I think, has been the reliability of the network. If you cannot trust the buses to get you somewhere, then if you have any choice, you're gonna find another way to get around. And so we have a network, and this is what the bus operators, you know, that's how they make their money. They say, well, how much money can we get out of people who don't have a choice? And what we need as a city is a network that people will choose to use, even if they have a car, even if they can afford the taxi. they're gonna get the bus, and that's got to be the goal of policy. And the only way to do that is as you say, franchising or public control. Having said that, even if we do that, yes, we can fix some of the problems. We can make this, you know, we can. I mean, I've been watching the message in the chat as well, actually, as the people contributing on the screen, and you know, the point, like I think it was Kathy, something about the digital signs on the bus stops. The information there is generally wrong, or if you ring up, it's coming in 5 minutes. Well, it isn't, is it? Now, how is it that, you know, we pay for those signs? It's public money goes into those signs. It's public money goes into things that bus companies ask for, like you know, changes to junctions and changes to bus lanes. And you know, you do that. The bus company says, yeah, please do this. You know, if you change that junction, if you change that bus lane, we can do a more reliable service. Well, what often happens is we spend that money, and then the company says, oh, wow, good. Actually, we can run this service with one fewer buses now, can't we? And save a bit of money for ourselves, and it'll be a bit less reliable. A lot of this unreliability is down to the bus company saying, well, let's try and run this service with one fewer buses. Let's run a service all the way through the city centre and out the other side, rather than two separate services, because we can do the whole thing with one fewer buses. And all of these things impact reliability. If you have a service that goes all the way through, as they all do now, you know, you have a blockage at one end, and it's not just one service gets its reliability hit, it's both of them. And it happens time and time again. And so, you know, with a bit of policy control, you can do this, but we'll also need more money to actually improve the service from where we are. At least the money we're putting into things like digital signs on buses and bus lanes or whatever, at least we know we're getting the benefit for them if we're franchising, rather than the bus company shareholders. But to actually improve the service, we're going to need to find more money to put into it. I think that's the hard truth. And there is a danger that if passenger use doesn't pick up post COVID back to where it was, that we'll still be going backwards. And that's the thing that frightens me most about this. We've got a crisis already. We may have a crisis on top of a crisis if we can't get people back on the buses.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joe, for your response there to our stories this evening and for making that Better Buses pledge. I'll pick up on things that the candidates have said in just a moment, but I will bring in our final candidate with us today. That's you, Simon. And so again, I ask you the question I've asked all the candidates: will you hear the call of bus passengers this evening and make that Better Buses pledge? Over to you, Simon. Have you got the option to unmute? Is it coming up? Grand, thank you. Over
right, there you go. Yes, I will. And rather like everybody else, I mean, you're pushing on an open door. I mean, obviously, it's not working for anybody as it stands at the moment. And it's interesting that the one party that instigated this muddle of biblical proportions haven't even turned up for it today. So, you know, if you look at going back to 1986, I mean, it was something like 276 million passenger miles done. We're now down to 83. So it's clearly been an awful thing. Obviously, as the Yorkshire Party, we are standing here for a devolved, you know, strong Yorkshire Parliament. And if you look at, you know, there's 5.5 million people in Yorkshire, and you know, if you look at Scotland, which is about the same size, slightly smaller, they have in the last 20 years, if you combine bus and rail together, they have been raised the use of public transport 40% in that time. So there is not just a tactical thing, and we're all going to be, oh, woe is me, we never get enough money, which is absolutely the case. But it's, as Einstein once said, you know, if you do the same thing and expect something different, that's the definition of madness. The challenge that we've got is that we're all going to go down to London and demand, you know, some more money, and we'll end up probably underwhelmed by everything that we get out of them. So tactically, of course, yes, franchising is by far the best of what we have got, and the one place that is now held up as an exemplar of good bus and train services integrated together is the one place that we didn't have privatized in the 1980s by the Conservatives. But I think if you're looking at a broader construct, then for me, the reason I am standing for the Yorkshire Party is that we need a properly devolved, powerful Yorkshire Parliament, and this is a step in the right direction. to get there. And in the meantime, everybody, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. It really is invaluable to hear it firsthand. And we know by actually travelling on the buses ourselves that you are not a snapshot. You're a representation of a very broken system. And if I'm the next South Yorkshire Mayor, I will absolutely sign that pledge, and I will work tactically to make sure we get franchising as quickly as possible, strategically work to get a South Yorkshire Parliament which will control it rather than going cap in hand to London all the time.
Well, thank you very much, Simon, and thank you to all the candidates who came along this evening, all of whom have pledged to some of what we are asking for, and many of you have pledged to just make that better buses system come in. So thank you very much. And I will just, before I hand for some closing remarks over to Nancy, who I know wants to impress upon people again the importance of this, I'll just pick up on one of the things that came out there about money, because we know that the bus service, of course, needs funding appropriately. But there are two big things I want to raise with you this evening, everyone. One, the money to reach a final decision on public control is already on the table. We have that here in South Yorkshire. According to the civil servants, we can make that decision with the money we have. So we can get on. There's no reason to hold back. And yes, we need to go to government and fight for the funding that we deserve in South Yorkshire. But even as things stand, Greater Manchester, without putting a penny extra into the bus network, is going to be able to cap the fares at £2. That's what they are expecting to do, because that's what the power of franchising gives you. It allows you to integrate tickets and reduce the costs there. So it's really a no-brainer, and we need to make it happen. And we're very pleased that the candidates here with us tonight are broadly on board with making that happen as quickly as possible, because, as we say, cost of living crisis, climate crisis really demands that of us. A brief aside to say that we did invite the other two candidates. Unfortunately, they didn't choose to join us this evening. So yes, as Simon says, they've chosen to not hear the needs of bus passengers today. I'm going to bring in for some final reflections before I wrap up Nancy, if she's still with us, but she seems to have had to have dashed off. So because of your good behaviour, everyone, I'm going to let you all go home early. So thank you again to all our speakers. You really show us how important this change is. And thank you once again to the candidates for coming along and for mostly making that better buses pledge. That's the urgency of this crisis, and that's what we need to get the green public service that South Yorkshire has always deserved and desperately needs. So thank you again, everyone. Let you all go off. The election's 3 weeks today. I hope you'll be considering the needs of our buses as you go forward. Thank you, everyone.